Not too many. I'll read something.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. It is always wonderful to welcome everybody. And I'm not speaking louder now. So again, welcome. It is an honor to welcome you, and it is wonderful to have all of you here to enjoy a great speaker we have invited tonight. And I am sure you will benefit from the discussion, the lecture, and the new information that you will receive. I also would like to let you know that we had a program last month to invite new members and ask and beg the old member to renew their membership. So I have to thank those who renewed their membership, and again welcome the new members to Windham World Affairs Council. Those of you who have not become a member, you may want to consider. It is the price of a hamburger on an annual basis. With this brief introduction, I had been criticized by few dear friends, why don't you introduce yourself? And I don't want to take too much time. It takes a week to introduce myself by my name. But my name is Ishaq Shaul or Isaac Shaul. You can call me anything you like. I am from Iran, and we do have film theories on Iran, and we hope that you will have the chance to come and see the program on Iran, Iranian culture through the film, and that will help to understand the culture, ancient culture of Iran. With this long introduction, let me introduce you our speaker, Mr. Jim Freedman. Our speaker tonight, Mr. Freedman, is a global leadership consultant with extensive business experience in Korea, China, and Philippines. He is well equipped to guide us in understanding China's strategy in building its new Silk Road and in understanding the impact it will have on international trade and geopolitical affairs. Let us welcome Mr. Freedman, who will tell us about China's One Belt, One Road plan and help us answer the question, why is China rebuilding the Silk Road and reclaiming the mandate of heaven? Mr. Freedman.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm very happy to be with you tonight. I'm speaking to you tonight not as an expert really, but just as a concerned citizen who happened to spend some time in China during some very interesting periods of time. So my first trip to China was in 2011, where I was working as part of an international business. I worked in healthcare administration, specializing in kidney disease, and we had developing our business plan in China, and I was posted to China for 3 years, helping them develop the business in various aspects. So I spent a lot of time in Shanghai and further north in a town called Changshu, which is small by Chinese standards, large by ours. We have 6 cities in the United States, over 6 million people. China has 44. So it's a whole different scale of development. And after that, the last period of time I spent in China was my wife, who's sitting in the audience tonight, was posted as a Fulbright scholar to Zhejiang University, which is one of the top 3 universities in China. And so I spent the last 6 months of my time in China. I enrolled in the international school and spent most of my time studying Chinese and Chinese culture. And my experience with China, I didn't live in an expat community. I didn't live on a base. I lived in China. I rode the bus every day in China. I took the subway every day in China. Everything I did, I spent most of my time with Chinese, not with other Americans. So mine is a street level view, and I'm speaking to you tonight as a concerned citizen, because what I saw there, I was there for the Trump election. And we saw the election from afar. In fact, I was in my class the morning of the election. 10 o'clock at night here was 10 o'clock in the morning in China. And I had my earbud in one ear listening to what was going on. And when we heard the results, I let out with a holy crap. And the Chinese students who were sitting next to me said, we know what holy means and we know what crap means, but we're not sure what they mean when they're juxtaposed like that. So we had a very interesting coffee break while I explained to them what was going on and why things didn't turn out as we wanted them to. So tonight, I'm going to talk to you about the One Belt, One Road initiative and what that means in terms of our relationship with China and our position as a global leader, if we still have that position. And so I'm going to take you kind of on a walk around the world as I see it. We're going to roam it would be like an airplane. We're going to circle for a landing before we actually get to where we're going. But I have to explain a couple of things to you to make sure that we're all on the same page. I'm sure you all know something about China, but I want to make sure we all know the same thing. So tonight when we have our discussion about what's going on, we're kind of working from an equal position. So I've got my clicker here with me. So this is a picture of a village not too far from a very famous mountain in China called Huangshan. And there are many beautiful mountain ranges in China. In fact, there are 5 of them. But they say if you go to Huangshan first, you can skip the other 4. But this is a village. This is actually Hongsun, which is the village where the Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon was filmed. And it represents kind of a period of China that really no longer exists. But some people have the image that this is still the China today. And in fact, I'm fairly certain that before our esteemed president got off the plane in Beijing last week, that he might have thought that this is where he was landing. But in fact, this is China. This is Shanghai, one of the most modern cities you can imagine. Shanghai is divided into 2 sections. There's a river that goes through the center of it. The old city is Puxi, the new city is Pudong. And this city didn't exist 15 years ago. 15 years ago, this was a rice paddy. And now it's the most amazing thing. And now there's a maglev train that you can take from the airport. It goes 45 kilometers to downtown Shanghai, takes 6 minutes, travels at 300 kilometers per hour, frictionless maglev. So we're talking Crouching Tiger and the Jetsons. It's quite a different. And so this is the China that we're comparing ourselves with today, and this is the China I'm going to be talking about today. So this is an old Chinese saying. Maybe someone in the audience can speak to us in Chinese about this, but it says, when the winds of change blow, some people build walls and others build windmills. I don't think I have to tell you who's building the walls, or trying to. Okay, next one, please. So the Silk Road, everybody knows something about the Silk Road, but I don't think everybody knows everything about the Silk Road. So I'm going to spend some time explaining to you a little bit about what's going on. The Silk Road, as you can see, the principal old Silk Road was the red line that went from Xi'an, China, out to Syria and Jerusalem, in fact. And then the others are offshoots of the original Silk Road, but it was established during the Han Dynasty about 300 BCE, right? And was a very extensive trade. You can see it linked most of Asia and the Central European Asian, and then on to Western Europe. So I don't think everybody knows that and how extensive it was. And that, in fact, there was more than one Silk Road. There were offshoots of the Silk Road. But this was the primary source of commerce for a very long period of time. And from 300 years before Christ until, according to Xi Jinping, today. Next slide. These are actually the goods that were traded across the Silk Road. And you can see many interesting things were traded. It wasn't only an economic trade, it was a culture trade. It was a political trade that was going on because of the people able to travel from one end of the Silk Road to the other. I think this is very interesting. Here, we talk about glass beads and glass beads. It's quite possible that the glass beads that we traded for Manhattan were coming from Persia and India? That's a trivia question that you could get on Jeopardy. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, One Belt, One Road. One Belt, One Road is the new initiative sponsored by Xi Jinping, who's currently the president of the People's Republic of China and also the general secretary of the Central Chinese Communist Party. If you were reading the papers 2 weeks ago, you may have realized that he was just reappointed and consolidated his power, and he'll be in power for at least another 5 years in this new position of General Secretary and the combined President of China. And also he's just recently consolidated his power, so he's also now, he wasn't before, Commander-in-Chief of the People's Liberation Army. So he has consolidated all of his power in a very short period of time. So One Belt, One Road. One Belt refers to the Overland Silk Road. One Road refers to the Maritime Silk Road, which he's reestablishing as well. So One Belt, One Road. And when they talk about one, they're talking about unity. They're talking about how do we bring everybody together? How do we connect everyone along this One Belt, One Road? It's a huge initiative. Next slide, please. So it connects 67 countries with physical, commercial, and cultural links. It's the recreation of the Overland Road. It's an establishment of the Maritime Road. And further, a new aspect of it is they're establishing a cyber Silk Road. And the cyber Silk Road means that China is going to be providing the infrastructure for all of the countries in Central Asia, Central Europe, that do not currently have adequate internet. And China is running the backbone communication systems for all of those countries. Now, that's kind of a scary thought. That's kind of a scary thought. Because while the Great Wall of China no longer exists, I can speak from my own personal experience, the Great Firewall of China exists. That if you go to China, you can get access to some things, but not everything. Google doesn't work, Facebook doesn't work, and anytime they decide to shut off anything that it's publishing any aspect of China that the China leadership is not happy with, things go blank. There were times when we were in China in the last 2 or 3 years when we were watching the TV CNN, and all of a sudden CNN would go blank, and for no particular reason. Most of us had what they call a VPN. Are you familiar with what a VPN is? It's a virtual private network, and it's a way of drilling through security. You can get through firewalls if you use a VPN on your computer. Now, the interesting aspect of that is almost every kid under 30 in China has a VPN and can get to Google and can get to Facebook. So it's one of these things where the Chinese government knows that everybody can break through, but they kind of look the other way, but everybody pretends that they don't know what's going on in the West, but in fact everybody knows what's going on in the West. It's a very Chinese position to take. But anyway, so you can see here the red is the Maritime Silk Road. I'm sorry, the blue is the Maritime Silk Road, the red is the Overland Silk Road, still starting in Xi'an and now going all the way through the upper routes up through Moscow, Poland to Belgium, and in the southern routes you can see where they're trying to establish the maritime connection. You may have heard recently about the South China Sea, and they're building an atoll, really, dredging up sand and building an island in that. And one of the reasons they're trying to do that is right now 40% of all the world trade goes through the South China Sea. So in projecting their power by building naval bases in that part of the sea, what they're trying to do is to say, what they're telling them is, we're protecting the trade routes from pirates. But Philippines and Vietnam and Thailand and the United States isn't all that thrilled about the fact that we have a naval base where no naval base existed before. So we'll talk about that a bit later. But you can see how the Maritime Silk Road really connects through the oceans, through some of the main shipping lanes in the world. Okay, next one, please. These are the member nations that are going to be connected through the Silk Road. And you can see 67 nations from East Asia to Middle Eastern Europe. It's really quite extensive. And imagine that China is providing the overland connections through highways and railroad, the maritime connection through establishing new sea lanes for freight and sea cargo, and now also cyber connections for all of those countries. So China is in the position now of really consolidating its power. Right now, economically in the world, they're number 2, but very shortly you can see with this kind of work going on that it's not going to be too long. First of all, because they're the number 1 economic power, and also they become the global leader in lots of things, Next slide, please. Okay, so initiative. The investment, China has committed $1.4 trillion immediately to the development of the Silk Road. The Silk Road investment started in 2014. We're in the 3rd year, and we're already up to about $500 billion investment in highways, infrastructure, trains, seaports, airports in all of these countries to connect them through economic trade. So right now, when it's completed, which is projected to be in 2030, we're looking, the Belt Road Initiative could cover 4.4 billion people will be connected with China as the head of that chain. I don't think everybody knows this. Okay. This, by the way, could I put that back? In the lower corner, that's the symbol for the Chinese currency yuan. So become familiar with it. You're going to see a lot more of it moving forward, right? Okay, next slide, please. This is from 2011, which is the pre-One Belt, One Road, to 2014. You can see that the investment has started to take off and really gotten really serious about what's going on. Now, when China invests in the Silk Road Initiative, when they go to a country, say like Myanmar, well, Myanmar is a poor country, doesn't have a lot of money to invest in roads and trains and seaports. So China says, worry not, we're going to make you a loan. We'll give you a loan at a very good rate, and then what we will do is we will come in and build the highways and build the trains and build the seaports for you. So in fact, China brings in its own workers. They don't use local workers whenever they do this. So in fact, China is paying itself $1.4 trillion. So they're giving it out, they're loaning it to the countries, they're getting back a very significant interest rate, but in fact they're paying themselves and they're employing all of their own labor in doing this. It's really it's a massive project. In fact, one of the things that my wife and I heard when we were there traveling around to the different universities last year was that China is very good at what they call satellite projects. Now, when you and I use the word satellite, we say, well, there's a mothership and there's a satellite. When they use the word satellite, they're saying projects that you can see without a telescope from a satellite, right? If you look at their Three Gorges Dam, you can see it from a satellite. If you look at their high-speed rail system, China now has more high-speed rail than all of the rest of the world combined, right? So anything you can see from a satellite, they're very good at. So this kind of infrastructure, where they're building infrastructure for Asia, Central Europe, and Central Asia, it's something they do very well, and they have the manpower to do it. Okay, next slide, please. So if you look at what they're really doing with the new Silk Road, there are really 5 corridors that they're establishing. They were establishing a road through China, Mongolia, and Russia. They're going through what they call the New Eurasian Land Bridge, which is the dark red, which is connecting through Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, and like to get to Moscow. They're talking about the Central Asia, West Asia Economic Corridor, which is going down into Syria and gives them access to Africa. And the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, which is the blue one here, which in fact is one of the most recently developed. If you've been reading the papers and paying attention at all, it's been in the paper recently because India is very unhappy what China is doing for Pakistan because it's approaching very near the India-Pakistan border. And we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it's raising a lot of difficulty right now. India is protesting to the United Nations about what China is doing in Pakistan because of building out the infrastructure there. So we're talking about going into Southeast Asia, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar, and finally the China, Indonesia. So rapid train from Bangkok to Beijing. High-speed rail system, financed by the Chinese, built by the Chinese, and if, by the way, some of the poor countries can't pay off their loans, owned by the Chinese when they call in the mortgage. Okay. Next slide, please. So how are they doing this? It's a very interesting investment opportunity, and probably Isaac knows more about this than I do, because he was a very, very well-schooled banker. They've established what they call the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. And they're using this. China invested $500 billion to start the bank, just a minor, they have controlling interest. But all of these other countries in red have contributed and are participating in this Asia Infrastructure Program and will benefit from this. So you can see that China is really establishing itself as the new nexus for all infrastructure and economic and cultural development throughout Europe and Asia, right? If you look at this map and aren't a little worried by this, yeah, well, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So there's a reason why this is all colored in red. Do you remember there was a famous song and a famous quote from Mao Zedong's book, "The East is Red." Go ahead. Next one. So we knew that this was happening. We were aware of this. Barack Obama, God rest him, knew this, and in 2014, 2015, they began to get worried about what was going on when China began this investment in the development of the One Belt, One Road initiative. And this was published in the New York Times in December of 2015, where they're saying, we're worried about this because if China takes leadership, China has kind of a no interference policy when they move in to take over. They don't care what your current government is. They don't care what your human rights issues are. They don't care whether people vote or don't vote. They don't care about gender rights. They don't care about any of this stuff. They come in the total non-interference. If you're a Star Trek fan, you know the primary objective is don't interfere. Just let them go. But we'll be very happy to build your infrastructure. We'll be very happy to take your money. And if you can't pay for it, we'll be very happy to run things for you. Okay? So, next slide, please. So, an interesting outgrowth of what's gone on so far is that in order to develop its maritime Silk Road, China has begun to make serious investments in seaports around the world. The ones in dark are wholly owned seaports by the Chinese government. So China owns Gwadar in Pakistan. China owns Djibouti. China owns the Seychelles. You can see the South China Sea. They have a memorandum of understanding with Darwin, Australia, to run that seaport. They have a memorandum of understanding with Namibia, and Sao Tome. So these are not just, we're building it for you and letting you run it. China owns these. Now, doing business in China, and when I was doing business in China, one of the things you have to kind of understand is it's not quite like doing business anywhere else in the world. And that should come as probably no surprise to anybody. 60% of all the businesses in China are what they call state-owned enterprises. They're run by the government, for the benefit of the people. Another 20% are what they call run by collectives. A collective is kind of like a commune, kind of like we used to have over here in the West Brattleboro in the 60s and 70s. But a commune, it's run in association with the government. So only 20% of all business in China is run by what you and I might even recognize as private enterprise. But in fact, you don't get to be a billionaire in China without some association with the government. Jack Ma, that's a name some of you might know, is the head of Alibaba. Are you anybody here aware of Alibaba? You know what Alibaba is? Alibaba is it's the Amazon, eBay. It's an all-encompassing, internet infrastructure program that's run out of Hangzhou, China, which is where my wife and I lived, for a while. Alibaba was right next to our campus. And by the way, last week, this is a new thing. Alibaba sponsors a day, the biggest shopping day in the world. How many of you have ever heard of Singles Day? Singles Day, 11/11, 1111 is it's a kind of an anti-Valentine's Day promoted by Alibaba to promote its online purchasing. And what it is, it's if you're single and you're alone, don't wait for your boyfriend to buy you a present. He might never buy it. Buy it for yourself. Treat yourself. And so last week on 11/11, Alibaba did $38 billion of business in one 24-hour period. On Singles Day. I don't think anybody here on Valentine's Day gets anywhere near that. Okay. So, and again, you can see that China is securing its maritime route, not just by negotiating treaties with these countries, but by actually buying and owning the seaports. Next slide, please. Overland route. The first train went from Yiwu to London in January of 2017. Yiwu is in Zhejiang province, not too far from Suzhou, Hangzhou. It's in that central part of Zhejiang province. It's pretty far from China to London, but they went completely overland except for the Eurotunnel. And so China is extending its reach already by the ability to deliver large amounts of cargo overland. So this is the new Orient Express. Forget about the fancy cars. This is something new and different. Next, please. So I'm sure you recognize the man on your right, my left. The man on the right is President Xi Jinping of China. And despite everything you're hearing these days about what's going on with Russia and Putin and Trump, we should be much more worried about what's going on between Xi Jinping and Trump. Because Trump may think that Xi Jinping is his best friend. Xi Jinping is sure that Trump is his best friend, but for not the normal reasons that you would think a friend should be, and we'll get into that. Trump has done more for Xi Jinping than any single person in the history of China has ever done for any other ruling party, and we'll get into that in a second. Next slide, please. Okay, TransPacific Partnership, this great evil partnership that both Trump and Hillary were going to defeat. Right? And again, everybody talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership, but I'm not sure that everybody quite understood what the implications of signing or not signing the Trans-Pacific Partnership were. There were initially proposed to be 12 member countries, and you can see it's really Pacific Rim. All these are Pacific Rim companies. Next slide, please. And these are the details of the TPP as it was proposed and as Trump pulled out of. Again, 12 member countries. China was not a part of the TPP. 24% of the world's trade, 36% of the world GDP, 40% of the share of the world trade held by the members. You can see the reduction of 18,000 tariffs were going to be removed. We're going to level the playing field for American industry in those 12 countries, comprising at one point $295 billion annually worth of trade. Right? This is something that both Hillary didn't want to pull out, to be a part of, and Trump certainly said, built his presidential campaign on saying, we're going to break down the TPP. It's a disaster. It's not. So, but this is what we pulled out of. And why this is very important was, in 2015, we told you with Barack Obama beginning to understand that China was developing this huge infrastructure investment. It was the Marshall Plan. The One Belt, One Road is really the Marshall Plan. It's Chinese Marshall Plan for Eastern Europe, for Central Asia, and for Asia. We're going to help you develop. The next generation of our market is going to be developed by us because we're going to give you the money to develop your economy, to develop your culture, to develop your trade infrastructure. And then we are going to be your primary partner for trade. Right? So that's what the TPP was. And you can see the numbers. Why was this a bad idea? Why was this a bad idea?
Parts of it were bad.
Pardon me?
Parts of it were bad, like the intellectual property law changes.
Well, yeah, but it was just, the point is now we don't have this.
Right.
You know, and now One Belt, One Road comes in. One of the reasons that Trump is Xi Jinping's best friend was he said, oh, Asia, we're not interested, thank you. We're going to pull out of these multilateral trade deals, and then we're going to do a bilateral trade deal. A bilateral trade deal is, I'll make a separate deal with Japan, I'll make a separate deal with Myanmar, I'll make a separate deal with Cambodia, I'll make a separate deal. So negotiating all these deals doesn't happen overnight. So a multilateral trade deal where everybody's agreeing and they're following American principles, American values, anti-corruption, rule of law, et cetera, all the things that we think are very important. Human rights, we have a chance to influence. But when you come off the stage and say, no thanks, we're not going to be there, then Xi Jinping says, well, great. This is wonderful for me. Next slide, please. So, and the 11 other countries that Barack Obama negotiated with were pissed. And if you know anything about working or living or doing business in Asia, almost nothing happens by accident. So last week, while Trump was in the Philippines at the ASEAN economic meeting, which is all of these countries were present, those 11 countries said, you know what, we think the TPP is still a good idea, so we're going to sign it without you. Without you. So now we have no influence with China in this. They weren't originally part of the deal. And now we have no influence with some of our biggest trading partners in Asia, right? And now the other countries, we don't have any bilateral deals with these other 11 member nations. And now we have to negotiate one by one. And now, because we pulled back and they don't trust us much anymore, they're kind of saying, well, we almost have to do business with China. You know, we have to develop our economies. We have to do something about jobs. We have to do these things. Who's going to be? And China's sitting there saying, well, come play with us. You know, we'll help you build out your infrastructure. We'll give you the money to do it. We'll build it for you if you don't have the capability to do it. You know, what could be better than that? So I'm not sure if this was intentional, that the reborn TPP proves that multilateral agreements trump bilateral trade deals every time. Okay, next slide, please. So the mandate of heaven, this is a little bit of Chinese history. The mandate of heaven is a very interesting concept. Next slide, please. And by the way, for those of you who speak Chinese, and I know there's at least one of us in here, that's Tianming. Tianming, which is the mandate of heaven. It's an ancient Chinese philosophical concept that was developed during the Zhou dynasty about 1,000 years BCE. And it's saying that in order to rule, we have to have the blessings from heaven. You know, God is on our side. The evangelicals would probably have something to say about this. But we're looking to say if things are going well, it means that heavens are with us. We've been blessed. You know, and if we take care of our people, if we do right, if we not corrupt, if we spend our money well, if we feed our people, if we give them jobs, then obviously we have the blessing of heaven. You know, and if we lose the blessing of heaven, obviously we deserve to be thrown out and somebody else gets to come in. Now, why is this important? Xi Jinping is a student of history. And let's go to the next slide, please. And I'll get this. The current term of office, 2012 to 2017 for Xi Jinping. He was just reappointed till 2022. His government leadership experience started in 1983 in Hebei province in China. And he's both the general secretary of the Communist Chinese Party, and he's also the president of the People's Republic of China. And his slogan, when he was running, in the sense that any Chinese leader runs for office, was the Chinese dream, 中国梦, right? How's my Chinese?
Great.
Okay.
很好。
很好. 谢谢. So the Chinese dream, and the Chinese dream is his concept of reestablishing China as the great nation that it once was. Not as it once was 50 years ago, not as it once was 200 years ago, but as it once was 1,000 years ago. Many of the people in the current Chinese leadership look upon the period from 1800 until maybe 1979, 1980 as an aberration, when China was under foreign control, and really subject to the Japanese, the Germans, the French, the British, whoever came in, they were subjugated. And so what Xi Jinping is trying to do, and when he talks about the Chinese dream to his people, he's talking about going back to the time when China was the premier power in the world. The greatest scholars, the greatest universities, the greatest navy, the greatest armies, just the best of everything. So he wants to bring China back, not 50 years, not 100 years, but to that period of greatness where China really was the central kingdom. The central kingdom, the center of the earth. The characters for the word China, 中国, really talk about the center kingdom. And some people say it's because it's the center most important, like Boston is the hub of the universe. Or some people say it's the center between earth and heaven, that to get to heaven you have to go through China. So his Chinese dream is a little bit bigger than Make America Great Again. And so now we have this 2017 to 2021. I'm not talking about the election years, I'm talking about the ruling years, right? He didn't become president until January 20th, 2017. That's, there used to be another day that would live in infamy. Yeah, so the President of the US and Make America Great Again. So next slide, please. So this is a quote when Xi Jinping appeared this year at the World Economic Forum and said, many of the problems troubling the world are not caused by economic globalization. And Xi sees globalization as one of the wonderful aspects for China to reassert itself as the world leader, as it used to be, right? And the One Belt, One Road initiative is all geared at extending its reach. China has really never had, except for the Mongolian period, a place where it really was happy. It was always been happy to stay within the boundaries of China, and unify and deal with the issues that are going on there. But China now is developing very differently, and it's looking to extend its reach. It's not extending its military reach. It doesn't really have a military reach except for a land army. Right now they have 1 aircraft carrier and 3 submarines. But they have a fantastic workforce, and they have a fantastic dream, and they have a lot of money. Next one slide, please. This is our esteemed leader's proposal. I am proposing a new foreign policy focused on advancing America's core national interests, so important, promoting regional stability and producing and easing the tensions within our very troubled world. He said this very recently. Next slide, please. And under the State Department, our mission statement was, the department's mission is to shape and sustain a peaceful, prosperous, just, and democratic world and foster conditions for stability and progress for the benefit of the American people and people everywhere. The new draft mission proposed by Rex Tillerson, above all, the mission of the U.S. Department of State is to advance the national interests of the United States and its people. There's no and there anymore. There's no and there anymore. Next slide, please. In the proposed budget for 2018 that's before the Congress right now, we can see that there are some aspects of the government as we knew it are changing drastically. And for our purposes, just the State Department. Last year, the State Department's budget was about $56 billion. This year, the proposed budget is about $38 billion. A 30% cut almost in dollars. And at the same time that we're cutting back on our State Department, and the State Department's mission is to promote American cultural and economic interests all over the world, we don't have the budget to do it anymore. We don't have the budget to do it. This is a problem. China is investing $1.4 trillion in its own infrastructure and the infrastructure of the Central Asia, Central Europe, Eastern Europe, and making those connections. What are we doing? Well, I'll show you what we're doing with the $20 billion that we're going to be missing. Next slide, please. By the way, this is, you can see that this week I got very busy. I had done this presentation a couple of weeks ago, and then this week I had to change a lot of things because of what happened while Trump was in Asia. So, again, new data shows Trump administration, 60% of the state's equivalent of 4-star generals are gone. Not only are people being fired, the discouraged members of the State Department are retiring. They don't see a future working in our government, for our government. And these are not the presidential appointees that are leaving. These are the career diplomats, who've been in Peter Galbraith was here, someone who knows what's going on. I spent a very short time in China compared to most people, just a little over 3 years. And anybody who spent any time in a foreign country, and I'm sure many of you here have spent time in a foreign country, you realize the longer you spend there, the less you know. And the more you realize you don't know about what's really going on. So Trump spent 12 days, and he's an expert. So rapid loss of diplomats, more workers than the Congress. What's going on? By the way, one of the two senior U.S. senators who questioned Rex Tillerson was John McCain. His own party is saying the congressional equivalent of WTF. Next slide, please. So how are we spending our money on developing our reach in the world? And I thought it would be nice to do a little historical review of some of the great walls of the world and their success. So the walls of Jericho lasted for how long? A couple of parades around the walls with trumpets blaring, and the walls of Jericho fell down. Hadrian's Wall, which was Hadrian, the Emperor of Rome, decided that he was tired of fighting the barbarians, and they built a wall across northern Europe, right? And if you go there, I actually went to see Hadrian's Wall. It's just north of Frankfurt, Germany. You can see still a part of it. And I thought it was a stone wall, like a Vermont stone wall. And the barbarians must have been very short. Right? Very short indeed. The Great Wall of China that you've all heard of, and a satellite project. You can see it from a satellite. The Chinese are good at this. The Great Wall of China never really worked. In fact, the Mongolians looked at it as they drove by. And they said, wow, that's an interesting piece of work. So World War I, Maginot Line. Anybody familiar with the Maginot Line? The French built a wall. Tom knows. The French built a wall to keep the Germans away. And it took about, less than 24 hours for them to breach the wall.
They couldn't turn the guns around.
Yeah.
And they attacked from the rear.
Exactly.
The Blitzkrieg.
The Blitzkrieg. The Atlantic Wall. D-Day was not D-Week, not D-Month. It was D-Day that took us to defeat the coastal defenses. The Berlin Wall lasted actually quite a long time. But I think we're just pretty close to one of the anniversaries. I think it was November 9th, 1989 that the wall came down. Yeah, something like that. Didn't last very long. The West Bank Wall still exists and is still causing trouble, but not really affecting the purpose that they built it for, right? It's causing more trouble, between the Palestinians and the Israelis than it actually is solving any problems. And the UN has come out very strongly against it. I don't know where you sit on Israel and Palestine, but whatever they're doing right now isn't working. And now we have the Mexican border wall, the proposed Mexican border wall that Trump is going to have the Mexicans pay for. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed side of the wall, as you can see it. And next slide, please. And this is the economics of the Trump wall. The total length of the wall, about 2,000 miles. We already have some existing wall, in case you didn't know. So there's about 1,000 miles of wall to be built. Lots of concrete. By the way, one of the prime contractors on the wall, do you know who one of the prime contractors, anybody know?
It's a Mexican corporation.
Well, no, the cement's coming from Mexico, but actually it's Halliburton.
Those guys, the guys that are Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yes, the same guy. And so the estimated cost of the wall, more or less, and this is not coming from me, this is coming from The Economist and Bernstein Research, third-party, objective, very rational people. They were saying it's going to cost roughly $25 billion. So remember that $20 billion that's missing from the State Department budget? So our major foreign policy initiative for 2018 is not going to be to invest in our own infrastructure. It's not going to be invest in the infrastructure of our neighbors. It's to build a wall that will separate our second largest trading partner in North America from us. Next slide, please. And this is actually one of the proposed designs. You can find this on the internet. It's one of the proposed designs of the new wall that we're going to be building. Right? Next slide, please. Look familiar? Yeah. Look familiar? And so, you okay, Ross? Yeah. Okay. So, again, the Great Wall of China took a very long time to build and never worked all that effectively. And so the Great Wall of Mexico, that hasn't even been built yet. So what I'm trying to tell you here is, by the way, these are facts. These are not alternative facts. These are not opinions. what China is doing to reestablish itself as the preeminent power of the world, and what our current leadership is doing to make America great again. And if, as a concerned citizen like you, if you recognize that there's some imbalance in what's going on here, and that we ought to be concerned about it, you know, far beyond what you might have been concerned at 7 o'clock when you walked in, you know, there's something that needs to be done. I'm not a politician. I'm not really an activist, you know, although I have strong feelings about some things. You know, I'm not running for office. You know, I'm not having a foundation. I'm not doing anything. All I am is speaking to you tonight as a concerned citizen saying, there was a Buffalo Spring, anybody old enough besides me to remember who Buffalo Springfield was? There's something going on in here. What it is isn't exactly clear, but there's a man with a gun over there. Okay, so lastly, next slide please. This, I think, is one of the most important things that Thomas Jefferson ever said. We in America do not have a government by the majority. We have government by the majority who participate. By the majority who participate. So in the last election, I'm assuming there's some like-minded people in the room with me tonight who may or may not have participated as vigorously as they might have in the last federal election. And so I hope this will give you some motivation, you know, to get involved. I don't care who you vote for. In fact, one of the things that I think I proposed a long time ago, and I think it's very important, we just came through Veterans Day. Veterans Day for us, Singles Day for China. I think that we should turn Veterans Day into Voting Day. You know, it's about the same time of year. You know, the veterans died so we could vote, right? And what greater way to honor them. And we are one of the few countries in the world that does not have Election Day as a national holiday. One of the reasons why we have such a poor turnout on Election Day is that people work. So why not celebrate democracy by giving everybody the chance to vote and honoring our veterans who died so we could vote by having Voting Day be Veterans Day. And that gives everybody a better chance to participate so that January 20th or November, what was Election Day last year, November 8th? November 8th, November 9th in China, you know, would not have been sort of traumatic for some of us here, for all of us, but I think we need to participate. So that's what I've got to say. I can take questions, and I'm sure there's a lot of people who have better answers than I do. Can you put up the next slide, please? Yes.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, the Chinese have expanded the One Belt to the Americas.
Their plan is to do that, yes.
I think the work began on the alternative Panama Canal last year.
I'm not aware of that, but I wouldn't be surprised if the Chinese were financing some of it. I wouldn't be surprised. Again, they want the Pacific Rim just like we want the Pacific Rim. Yes, Roger.
It's economically, what I'm about to say is that it's in a sense kind of sickening, but the military-industrial complex is almost half our budget plus the multiplier factor.
Yeah.
And we're doing huge amounts of business all around the world selling arms, which is a terrible thing to be using to make money.
Yeah, well, one of Trump's proudest statements when he came back from Japan was that we sold Japan missiles so they can protect them and us from the North Koreans.
But we have military bases in 172 countries.
Yes.
Our actual...
Is there a question here, Roger?
Well, the point is that that's an economic force as well.
So we can project the next, if you look at the figures that's going on here, my opinion, just my opinion, is that China is not fighting the next war on the ground with weapons. China is fighting the next war with dollars, you know, and with infrastructure and with their workforce, and you know, and they're extending their influence. Let me make an analogy. I come from a business background. Some of you may be familiar with Walmart. You know, when Walmart deals with a vendor, when they say, you know, I've got the best pom-pom hats in the world. But I'm a small guy, I'm a little guy. And Walmart buyers can say, we really like your hats, but we're gonna need 5,000 of them by next Monday. So you're gonna have to ramp up to do that. And the guy says, well, yeah, I'd really like to do it, but I really don't have the finance. Walmart says, don't worry, we'll help you finance your ramping up in your productivity. And that's great. And so they'll go, and the guy will have the best year of his life, the best next year of his life. He will sell 10 times, 100 times more hats than he ever sold in his life. And then to keep up with the Walmart order, what's going to happen is he's going to give away all of his other customers to somebody else. Right? And then Walmart's going to come back and say, we really like your hats, but we think they're too expensive. You're going to have to take a price cut if you're going to keep on. And so the guy, doesn't have any other customers to sell to. He's already meeting a very tight price margin for Walmart already, and now he's going to have to take a price cut. And Walmart says, well, if you can't do that, we have this other vendor over here. So to a certain extent, China is reaching out and getting these smaller, less well-developed countries dependent upon them, through their financing of the infrastructure projects. And then when they can't pay, don't worry, we'll run it for you. So I think I showed you that slide before. It was not only an economic seaport that we have in Pakistan, now China's using that as a naval base. How about that?
There is a question back there.
Yes.
Two comments.
Yeah.
China began this process over 50 years ago. One key example would be the Tanzam Railway in the 50s, in the 60s. And the other concern that bring out is how intellectually they've reached into universities all over the world through the Confucian Society. I forget the exact
Yeah, the
name.
Confucian Society. I'm well aware of the Confucian Society, but actually they're doing much more than that. I had the opportunity with my wife not only to help her and to teach at some of the universities, but the top 40 universities in China get a special funding from the government. They call them the 985 universities. And the project that the government is sponsoring is to bring those top 40 universities up to global standard in a very short time. Now, China is investing. One of the markets, one of the products that they're trying to get hold of is supercomputers. When was the last time that America led the field in supercomputers? Do you know? Does anybody remember the Cray computer that came out?
30 years ago.
30 years ago. You know who's the number one and number two fastest computer in the world today?
China.
Chinese. They are cornering the market in supercomputers. You want to talk about big data, you need big computers, right? And so, little by little, step by step, they have a long-term strategy. It's not next quarter, next year, next 5 years. It's much longer than that. They're looking at taking over the major next developments in the world, innovation. China has not been innovative particularly, but they're going to get there because they have tremendous numbers of people to be there.
Peter, this gentleman here.
Yes.
And you're next, sir, back there.
So, are we headed towards another Cold War? And if so, what kind of Cold War?
We can't afford a Cold War.
So, why not?
Why not? Because China now holds 7% of our debt. They hold our debt. We can't go to war with them because they'll call in the loan and we can't pay them. They are the largest debt holder of any country or of any entity in the world. China owns more of our debt than we do. Yes?
What you talk about how significant it is that the Chinese government is able to basically determine economic policy in a way. So, for instance, in the West, we're used to.
Okay. How does China determine its economic policy? I think you have to understand a little bit of historical perspective. From the Cultural Revolution, 1966, till about 1979, was one of the worst periods in China's history. Somewhere between 30 and 30 million people starved to death. A lot of people were sent to the country. Even President Xi needed to be culturally educated because he came from a ruling family, and he spent 7 years in the countryside between his high school and university working in the fields as a laborer to be re-educated. And so they're coming out of this is really the first generation which is somewhat analogous to our Depression generation. They were coming out, no food, starvation, no jobs, very bleak future. And then they opened up, After Mao left and Zhou Enlai and Deng Xiaoping came in, all of a sudden, China's beginning to flourish. China now has a middle class. Life really has never been better, for many of the Chinese. There is no hunger, particularly in China today. They're in the process of developing a very interesting national healthcare distribution system. So from their perspective, life's pretty good. And the other thing you have to understand is from a Chinese perspective, individuality is not a priority, in the Confucian and Buddhist and the Chinese mindset. Group stability, group harmony is what they strive for. People will sacrifice themselves for the betterment of the group. This idea that the individual can stalemate the government doesn't exist, never has really existed. And so to them, the fact that the government is controlling the economy and is deciding who gets what and where, it's pretty good because they're all eating, they all have jobs, they all have health care. The Chinese male, they retire at 60 with a pension. Chinese women retire at 55 with a pension. They get housing, they get health care, they get a lot of things that are pretty good. So historically, from their own perspective, they're at a very different point in their history, the first generation post-depression, post-cultural revolution, as opposed to us, which are our depression, if you don't count 2008, was a long time ago, and most people don't know that kind of hunger, don't know that kind of joblessness, and have never experienced the kind of tragedy that the Chinese experienced during that period of time. So it's a very different mindset. Yes?
Thanks for bringing this to our attention. It is worrisome. It's brilliant that they use their workers to go into these other countries to build the infrastructure, and then if they can't pay the loan interest, they conceivably could own the infrastructure.
Not conceivably, by the way, it's happening.
It's happening. That's so worrisome to own land, own infrastructure in someone else's country, and I can see problems and arguments, and down the road the potential to go after that country if you're having problems, and you're right there. I mean, the question is China running out of land right now for their 3 to 4 billion people? It's a big country.
It's a big country, but
okay.
80% there's an urbanization program going on, moving Chinese from the farm to the cities. And you have the big coastal cities. 10 years ago, about 30% of the Chinese population lived within the cities. I think the last time I read the population statistics, right now about 70% live in the cities. I said before, we have 6 cities, over 6 million. They have 44. Shanghai, where I lived for a while, had a registered population of 25 million. And that was a tier 1 city. The city where I spent a lot of time, where our factory was considered to be a tier 4 city. Tier 4, that only had 6 million. So it was a small city by Chinese comparison.
So they have plenty of room, but could there be something devious down the road here in terms of not only economic but also military?
I don't think so. And the reason is that the number, and why we would be stupid to get involved in that, is the landmass of China is greater than the landmass slightly of North America, even including Alaska. So how do you have, you'd have to almost have a 10 for 1 or 1 for 1, I don't know what the ratio would be, where you could control the country. Especially, I think we've learned over a period of time that occupation doesn't work. And I don't think the Chinese are really interested in occupation, but they are interested in economic growth, in establishing their preeminence once again as a world leader, and they want that kind of recognition. Yes?
Thank you.
I was struck when you had the map of the maritime routes.
Yes.
How I've read so many of those countries in those regions, in the South China Sea and over in the Indian Ocean and all, are concerned about sea level rise and the impact of climate change. And
Yes.
I just wondered if you had heard anything about the Chinese perhaps actually doing some good by being involved in infrastructure in those areas.
Well, yeah. In fact, China has carved out, for example, it just came out of the last Party Congress, they've carved out electric cars. They're hoping that by 2030, that all the cars in all of the major cities along the coast, there'll be only electric cars allowed. So you've got Shanghai with 25 million people, Beijing with, I think, 18 to 20 million people. You've got, some of the other bigger cities, Guangzhou. And so you're talking about hundreds of millions of people where those cities will be limited access to electric cars only. They're going after the car market, but they're not going after the diesel market or the gasoline run market. They're going after the electric market. And we have 1.4 billion people, and we have 40 top universities who are pointing in one direction. And by the way, our experience at the university where we were, at Zhejiang University, 50,000 students, and when we interacted with them, we taught them, we ate with them. We used to joke sometimes, they served 20,000 people in the main cafeteria at night on the campus where we lived. Very quick, very seamless, and we felt we got smarter just by sitting there and eating with them every night. There was so much brain power in their room. They don't, and Chinese students don't work outside of the classroom. They're not concerned. Chinese education is virtually free, right? And they are dedicated to it. They put 100%. I don't think we've ever had more dedicated, more hardworking, more bright, more polite students than we experienced, at these universities. And we used to joke. We used to walk home on Friday night coming back from, there was a gym that we used to go to off campus. And we came by the library on campus, which was a 8-story building. And they would close about 11 o'clock. And it would be like watching the clown car at the circus. You couldn't believe that one building could hold that many people. So there was a traffic jam at 11 o'clock at night on Friday night, just people exiting the library. So when they decide to go in a certain direction and they direct their energy and resources at it, you better be careful. Yes?
Well, overall, your assessment is quite bleak. That, obviously they're very thoughtful, they've been planning ahead, they're moving in one direction. And I think that part of what you're saying is that the American government needs to be a lot smarter and a lot more strategic. I'm wondering if your thoughts about moving forward go beyond the next election and what.
Well, I think it starts with the next election, but I'm not a politician. I'm not an academic in the sense of I haven't studied China. I'm not a China hand. I may be a China toe, but I'm not a China hand. I just worry because when I talked about the bailout, the best and the brightest of our foreign service experienced diplomats, analysts, whatever you want to call them, are leaving the government in droves. And because of the hiring freeze, I just heard a statistic published by AFSA, the American Foreign Service Association, which is the union which governs them, that they now have something like 500 openings at entry level, and because of the hiring freeze, they've only been able to hire 100. So while you're having all this exodus at the top, you also have a bottleneck at the bottom. And right now in Korea, let me talk about Korea for a second. We have no ambassador to South Korea right now. The mission is being run by the Charge d'Affaires. Now the good news is he's been there for quite a while and he's an expert, but he's not the ambassador. And when the South Koreans or the Chinese want to negotiate with somebody, they don't want to negotiate with someone who's not the ambassador. They want to go right to the top. And then when Trump said last week, nobody has to worry about foreign policy except me because I am foreign policy. Well, he just cut off Rex Tillerson at the knees. Because who wants to talk to Rex if they know that anything that Rex says is just, he's just mouthing whatever Trump says. So, I mean, and somebody said, well, what if Rex Tillerson would resign? And what my comment would be, who would notice? What impact would he have? Now, if Jared Kushner resigned, we'd have a problem. Yes, yes, sorry.
The element you could have put more in about the whole about climate change and what China
Yeah.
is doing and contrast between China and the U.S. It's sort of going in.
I'm sorry, what is the U.S. doing right now?
Well, going in the opposite direction.
Well, I mean, we pulled out of the Paris Agreement.
Right.
China is still a part of the
Right.
agreement.
And they're admitting climate change is real. They're starting to take responsibility.
Yes,
for
yes.
it. So that could play a part of in your presentation as well if you wanted to, because I think.
Well, I only had an hour. I could speak
Yeah.
about this for the next 5 days,
That's
and
a big one.
as these
Yeah.
people in this row would attest,
Yeah.
they heard me practicing and preparing for this for the last 6 months.
Yeah.
No, I
That's a
just
big
am
issue.
upset. Yeah, there's a lot that we're not doing right, and we seem to be going in the wrong direction. Even, well, you know, I could talk about politics, but I'd rather talk about China. Yes?
Is it possible that the economics that we're teaching in our schools and the business models that we're learning in our business schools are basically outdated? That is to say,
Well, if you think
what
that
you're describing
yes,
is
yeah.
a sea change in this world of ours.
Yes.
And it may be that our concepts of these things and the Chinese owning a port and, or, you know, that one triggers me off by saying that, you know, national boundaries don't particularly mean anything, so what's that country going to do? Going to say Chinese go home? The whole concepts that we're operating under and anxious about are basically outdated.
Well, you have an economist sitting right next to you. You should ask him. You know.
We do argue about it, but my point is.
You know, but I think
there's a
you're exactly
move-up
right.
that's
And
gonna
I also
have to
think
take
that
place.
the Chinese, you know, if you went to, when I say communism today, you know, we have this image of Russian Soviet communism, you know, and the Marxist-Leninist theories of communism. That is not Chinese communism today. The Chinese, as they have done for thousands of years, they get a concept, they look at it carefully, and they say, that's kind of neat. How do we make it Chinese? You know, how do we make it Chinese? So the Chinese communism is not. It's almost like an oxymoron, socialized capitalism. One of the biggest venture capital funds in China is run by the People's Liberation Army. How does that happen? You know, so there's this juxtaposition of these things that we find hard to understand, which the Chinese accept quite readily. So if you've been to any of the major cities in China recently, there's rampant capitalism all over the place, but it's centrally controlled. How do you have centrally controlled capitalism? That doesn't make sense, but it's working. You know, I had the company that I worked for when I was working over there was a German-owned company. And every now and then we'd have a visitor from Germany come over. And when I showed you that picture up front about old China, new China, looking at Shanghai, we'd be standing on the bank of the river, and if you looked west, you were looking kind of like at old China. And then you turn east, you know, and you'd see this fantastic, you know, one building after another, high-rise, modern architecture. And I remember this one guy, Rolf, used to say, he said, if I wasn't here, I couldn't believe it, that they could do this. And I said, Rolf, I'm glad that you're amazed, but that's a really arrogant statement, right? Because the Chinese can and are doing it. Because the Germans, especially those who grew up in West Germany, know that communism will fail. And you're right, the Marxist, Soviet, Leninist, Russian communism failed. Chinese communism is doing quite well, thank you very much. And all you have to do is spend 5 minutes there to realize what's going on. So, and I don't think our current leadership has that kind of broad enough vision to understand the game that they're in. When Trump was negotiating with Xi Jinping, it was like the freshman team negotiating with the NFL. You know, they're just not in the same league. Yes, sorry.
Simple, probably dumb question, but you're talking about, you know, we see where we are and see where they are. Do you see, assuming we got rid of certain people at the head of our country, do you see any way that we could get turned around and move in this direction?
What I would like to see personally is I'm not a Democrat and I'm not a Republican, I'm an independent. You know, I will vote according to the issues that I like or the issues that I don't like. I want to know who you are and why I should vote for you. So I don't think either party right now is draping themselves in glory with the positions they're taking on any issue. Because they're not negotiating. You're the negotiation expert here. They're taking positions. You know, you don't negotiate from a position. You kind of try to find what the common ground is. And all I see now is the Republicans throwing PR hand grenades at the Democrats, and the Democrats are throwing PR hand grenades at the Republicans. And the Republicans are saying, why can't you become a Republican? And the Democrats saying, well, why can't you grow up and be a Democrat? You know, and they're arguing from cultural ideology. They're not in a belief. They're not arguing from a position of there's a future that we agree on that we want to work towards. We may come from different positions, but we see a future that we can reach. And I don't see that happening right now. So until something major difference happens, and I believe the current leadership is playing to the lowest common denominator, playing on the fears and anxieties that we all have. I don't have to be a Midwestern Republican to be afraid about what's going on in the country. I'm scared shitless half the time when I turn on the news in the morning and realize what we're up to today. When I see the president poking North Korea with a stick, and if you poke them long enough, they're going to react. And by the way, it's just another thing that China has done. We installed terminal high altitude anti-missile defense in Korea 3 years ago to counteract North Korean missiles. China was very unhappy about that, really unhappy, and so unhappy that they organized a boycott. And so South Korea had become very dependent upon Chinese tourism for its economy. A lot of money was being spent. China said to its people, don't go to Korea. Don't spend any money in Korea. And Korea was really suffering. And when Trump came through and said, we have a bigger stick, we're going to kill you, we're going to burn you up, fire on high, awesome, fire next time. And as soon as he left, Xi Jinping had a visit with the new president, Moon Jae-in. I forget his name. President Moon, and said, don't worry about that guy. He said, we've got your back, right? And even though that he says he's not going to negotiate, we're going to negotiate. And they just sent an envoy to China yesterday. China sent an envoy to North Korea yesterday to make a proposal to the North Koreans about, it's called the freeze to freeze. You freeze your nuclear policy, and we'll freeze our war exercises in the South China Sea and the East Sea. So it's freeze, right? And Trump tweeted today, I think tweeted. He said something online.
Tweeted, I like
Yeah, tweeted online, said today, oh, this freeze to freeze, no, Xi Jinping and I agreed that wasn't going to happen. And then the social media in China said today, oh, no, we didn't. So who's Korea going to go with? Is Korea going to go with the guy who's going to nuke North Korea and the radioactive cloud will not drift south? Or is Korea going to align with China, who's saying, look, we can negotiate your way out of this, but play with us? They're playing a long game. Maybe.
One, two more questions.
Two more.
Let me ask one, or you're one.
Yeah, you didn't talk too much about what you called, I guess, in the write-up, the virtual Silk Road.
Yeah, the Cyber Silk Road. I mentioned in the beginning. Well, China, the biggest online messaging service in the world today is not WhatsApp, it's not Messenger, it's WeChat. They have over 1 billion users signed up. So instant messaging in China. Their whole platform now is capable of handling on a daily basis far more than any of ours can get. So they're very interested in saying, look, we've got this network available to us. You don't have a network. Why sign up with those guys? Sign up with us. We're your neighbor. We'll take care of you. We'll build the internet structure for you. Now, who's listening? Big Brother. So, and the countries that have no internet are saying, well, we can't wait to negotiate because the American government doesn't provide the internet. It's some company has to be willing to go in there and provide the internet for them. So you're talking maybe 3 to 5, 6 years. China will say, hey, you can have internet next month, next year, 2 years from now. You can be a totally wired country. Who are you going to go with? They can outmaneuver us. When I used to travel back and forth way too often between Boston and Shanghai, and almost every time I landed again, I was taking the taxi from there to my apartment. Something new was going on. When they decide to build something, they're not really concerned about EPA or about OSHA or about any of those things. They said, okay, tomorrow we're going to build. The central train station in Shanghai makes any airport in North America look shabby by comparison. It's just unbelievable. They do really well. Yes, back in the corner.
I was wondering if you have any idea what these, what China's expansion into other countries has actually accomplished for the larger economy in that country, and to what extent maybe the political leadership there represses human rights
Okay,
Yeah.
it's a good question.
Or cultural.
It's a
you know,
good question.
or
First of all, they're still in the investment building up period, so there's no ROI yet, there's no return on investment. But again, they're playing a much longer game than we do. They're thinking this might be a 3, 5, 7, 10-year return before we get any return on this, and they're okay with that. And the other thing is they have a kind of a non-interference policy. You know, you don't tell us how to run our country, we won't tell you how to run yours. But we will build these things for you, right? So they don't say that they're not evangelical about communism. They aren't. You know, they don't say that you have to be a member of the Communist Party for us to work with you. They don't care about that. You know, they care about extending their influence and becoming the preeminent power in the world. So they're playing a much longer game than we are.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Add on to that real quick. I feel like here in the U.S., at least in with my generation, I think the consensus is our attention is too much focused on like, let's find out what America's like. You know, when we really like work together, but we're so diverse. And truly, I think maybe if China would want to, like you know, I understand the rhetoric behind those that voted for Trump and the rhetoric behind those that vote for Hillary. I'm not sure what Hillary's position was with regards to China, but I don't see, I mean, I think it would be really interesting to find out what kind of a sort of a pivot we could make towards working more collaboratively with China.
Right.
Instead of viewing them as
Barack
the
Obama attempted that pivot. Barack Obama started in 2013, 2014. In his second term, he started to pivot towards Asia. And you can read a lot about it because he called it the pivot towards Asia. But the last factoid that I want to give you before we wrap up for tonight is there are the largest foreign student population in the United States today at our best universities are Chinese. There are over 300,000 Chinese.
400,000, right?
Yeah, it's somewhere between 300,000 and 400,000 Chinese are studying today. Also, at the top 40 universities I mentioned before, about 50,000 at each university, they all speak and write English well. I mean, whenever we got lost in China, I would just find a student and I would be okay.
As far as I'm concerned, if you want to learn Chinese in college, you have to go to like a pretty good school with a pretty good program, and the ones that
What
are
percentage?
not are
100% of the graduating class of Beijing University, Tsinghua University, Zhejiang University, Shanghai Jiao, 100% of them speak, write, and read English well. What percentage of Harvard, Princeton, Yale graduate with any proficiency in Chinese? Okay. Last one.
Just to add some fuel to the fire, my wife and I took a trip to the Caribbean about 4 or 5 years ago. China was in there building elementary schools and hospitals,
Yes.
and also in Cuba. And they're in the South Atlantic drilling off Brazil for oil. They're in Western Canada, and that's kind of a ring of fire there.
Right. And they also own about 2/3 of Jared Kushner's apartment building in Jersey City. But this final thought I'd leave you with is I don't think China's our enemy. They're not, really. They don't want to be our enemy. On the other hand, they're not our friend. You know, and we're going to be left in the dust. We will be toe jammed to them unless our government starts to catch fire and understand there's something going on out there that we're not tuned into, that we're not aware of, and that we need to get behind in order for something significant to change as we move forward. Yes?
I'd be really interested if you, there's another presentation later on, but I'd be really interested to know how the Confucian Society that someone mentioned, what role that, like, maybe spiritual cohesiveness has to play.
I would love to be able to do that for you, but you're way out of my league. You know, I was raised Catholic. You know, and I'm studying, you know, I'm fascinated by what's going on, but I'm sure that maybe we could find somebody in the crew that's more aware of what's going on with Confucianism. I can tell you that...
we do have experts right in front of you.
Yeah.
I don't want to embarrass them and announce their names, but we do have a number of very, very important people here who have been in China, grew up in China, and we will consider your recommendation.
I just want to say, first, thank you very much. Again, I am not a Chinese expert. I'm just a very concerned citizen who thinks that more people ought to be as concerned as I am about what's going on across the ocean. Thank you very much for coming.
There is one more thing about Chinese that I like to share with you. They have 5,000-year history, and every leader in that country knows their history and has learned all the lessons they can learn about the mistakes that their government has made. They don't want to repeat. Unfortunately, this is not happening today with our government. Before I let you go, we would like very much to invite any of you who are interested in Win-Humboldt Affairs Council to join us in the board. We do have a board of 10 people. We have our vice chairman here. I am the chairman, as I mentioned, and Mr. Freedman is a board member, and we have many others who do a lot of work bringing to you what you have heard tonight. So anybody interested, it is an honor to have you. Let us know. I am here. Let me know your name, background, and with that brief introduction, I would like to have Mr. Javad Choudhury, our vice chairman, to make a couple of presentations here.
So is this a Jack in the Box that's going to
Vermont-made products. And as a message to you and to all of you, we are supported in this by Wyndham Wines. So please, when you go back there, tell them you heard Jim Freedman. We are supported here by the Brattleboro Pharmacy. Andy, who runs the pharmacy, produces his own honey. He's giving you a little gift out.
So this is pharmaceutical grade honey, is that what?
Yeah, a few other mixtures in there. Tavernier chocolates.
Oh, yeah.
In Brattleboro. They've given a little gift to you.
Oh.
Mocha Joe's. I don't want Mocha Joe's. Please, if you get a chance to talk to them, tell them you heard Jim. So
they might slam the door.
No, they won't slam the door. They're lovely people. And North Road.
North.
No, the granola company.
Granola, True North.
True North granola, specifically. Enjoy it.
Oh, thank you very much.
So please, when you meet any of them, tell them.
You can find the chocolate at the winter market downtown. They're very sweet people. Come to the River Garden on Saturdays. If you want to have their chocolate, they're our buddies. They're great.
Nice to see you.